When you look at Asia today, what makes its marketers generally distinct? Is it really a case of same but different? Or are we seeing Asian defined as a new playbook altogether?
Yes, we are different, but what are we doing with our difference? Are we being very insular and closed-minded, or can we use the things that we've learned in this part of the world to kind of teach the rest of the world, right? Asia is such a hot test bed for the things on the fringes, So there is a point of view that we can give to the world. How do you move fast and build brands, right? That is something anyone can relate to.
Your report talks about the twin paces of growth. It's the sprint and the long distance.
At the end of the day, it is just another way of saying, you have to balance or integrate brand and performance, right?
When you have brand plus performance, we can see, an uptake of 90% ROI come in just by pairing them together. Hello and welcome to the CMO Office Podcast. My name is Nikki Taylor. I'm the Marketing Communications Director for Analytic Partners and your host. Today, I'm joined by someone who has made it her mission to put Asian marketing on the global effectiveness map. Rica Facundo is the Managing Editor of WARC Asia and the co-author of The Pace Principle. She has spent years studying how brands grow in Asia and why this region is not just keeping pace with the world, but leading it. Rica, it's great to have you with us. Welcome.
Hey, Nikki, thanks for having me.
Rica, you have a unique view across the region as Managing Editor of WARC. When you look at Asia today, what makes its marketers generally distinct? Is it really a case of same but different? Or are we seeing Asian defined as a new playbook altogether?
Nikki, I love that you use that term, which we reference in PACE principle, called same but different. It's such an Asian term, but I think it's so useful to explain a lot of different concepts. So when we talk about marketing effectiveness, right, we are same but different. We are tied by similar challenges, the same principles of effective advertising, but there's a difference and a nuance to how we go about it. So if you're talking about how Asia is different, the joke is usually like anyone who spends time in Asia is kind of like, it's like a boot camp. You know what I mean? Because any of the challenges that marketers face, whether it's like fragmentation, limited budgets, doing more with less, in Asia, that problem is exacerbated. If you think about fragmentation, we can talk about fragmentation from a media standpoint. We don't have those one big players that you can just, you can target, but like every country, every region has a different media platform, for example, that you need to cater to. If you're talking about culture, everyone always says, Asia is not, it is a region, but every country is very different, right? Even if you look at something like India is multiple Indias in one. So if you're a marketer who has to handle APAC, that's like 6 to 8 different kind of nuances that you need to take into consideration. So, you have to still deliver that same message, but it's exacerbated by multiple things. And the last thing I'll touch on is, I think, the landscape from a more big picture standpoint. If you think about tech enablement, right? Because tech here and its impact on the audience is so much more profound, I think, than it is maybe in other markets. Because let's take payments, for example, right? The impact on tech, you have consumers who are leapfrogging directly into like e-wallets and payments instead of going to banks, for example. So if you come here, you really need to reset your expectations about, the way things work, because things are changing so fast here and you need to keep up because, tech is enabling that. The competition is becoming a lot more, it's a lot more increased and a lot more competitive for anyone who has to operate here.
Yeah, that's so critical for marketers to understand the unique distinctiveness in Asia. You touched on quite a number of things there that we're going to unpack. The fragmented ecosystem, the fact that we're very mobile first, payments. I love that you brought that up. It's sort of an afterthought, I think, for a lot of people. So I think you've really started to draw out some of the key points that make us distinctively differently. And like you said, it is a bit of a boot camp for people that are outside coming in to understand the differences and how that plays out from a marketer's perspective. And I think the last great point that you made is it is a challenge as someone who's been a regional marketer for many, many years. When you have the region, like you said, in India, itself, there's so many different regions and cultural nuances, ecosystems, how you do things. And then you add in Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Vietnam. It's also vastly different. It's amazing. But with many global frameworks on effectiveness, they've been built on the Western data. So what do you feel was missing that really prompted you to create the PACE principle specifically for Asia? Because I know you are really a strong advocate to make sure that Asia had its own report.
So as you pointed out, WARC and myself, we're a big believer on marketing effectiveness that is grounded on marketing science, and therefore the data set, right?
Love that.
And a lot of the data sets out there are based on Western markets or more developed markets for kind of a larger, more broadly way of describing that. And so the study was born from, I'd say it's a fair question, Nikki, but it's also a bit annoying in a way, annoying in a good way, because the questions that we get is, does it apply here? And I'm pretty sure anyone who's worked in a regional role or a local role also probably gets that, gets that tension, right? Does this apply here?
Yes.
Asia is so vast and diverse for all the reasons we just spoke about in your first question. Does it make sense that what's happening on the other side of the world makes sense here? And I'll be honest with you, I was a bit biased when I first started the study. Of course, I'm a champion for Asia, and I was adamant to prove all the ways that we are different. But actually, this is where the term came from. Yes, we are different, but we are same, but different, right? When we say that we are same in this context, is the same as that we are governed by the same universal principles of effective marketing. It's based on science. It's the same logic to why you have things like universal human truths, for example. When people say that we are the same, and I really had to reflect on this because, I've been guilty of saying that as well. We're so different, we're different from the rest. When people say that we are different, what they are alluding to is how we deliver that communication to market. Of course, things like the medium and the message needs to take into account local nuances. So building on my point earlier, we're a diverse market, right? You can't just assume we're all the same. Let's say, Chinese folks, for example, people from China, mainland China is very different from the Chinese diaspora around the world, right? So of course, you need to be able to understand that. But I launched the study, my gosh, where's the time gone? End of the year. I launched the study back in April.
Yep.
And I've presented this a lot, and I've done a lot of reflection, especially, in preparation for this. And I realized something. When I first started out this study, it was very inward looking, right? Which is, how can I help marketers here apply the rules of effectiveness? But we are living in a globalized, world. And I think it's also time for us to look outward. Yes, we are different, but what are we doing with our difference? Are we being very insular and closed-minded, or can we use the things that we've learned in this part of the world to kind of teach the rest of the world, right? Because I'm saying that we have the same challenges as my counterparts in, the U.S. or, the West or wherever it is. They're having the same challenges as us. So when you talk about things like speed, diversity, fragmentation, these are things anyone can relate to.
Yeah.
And what I love about using Asia, is we're in research, because I used to do a lot of more qualitative research before, there's this concept of extreme users, right? When you do research, you want to understand the extreme users because, it's in there you'll find some interesting, innovative solutions and ideas.
Yep.
And Asia is such a hot test bed for the things on the fringes, so there is a point of view that we can give to the world.
Yep.
And so luckily at Cannes Lions this year, we have creative impact stage at WARC, which is, I always say that's where all the effectiveness nerds, like you and me, you would definitely, if you're going to come next year, you'll be with me on that stage.
Yep.
But so it was the first time I got to program an Asian point of view on effectiveness there, right? Because we really want to champion more inclusive local voices.
Love that.
And but the framing was different, Nikki. I keep saying this to everyone. I want to say this on this platform. The framing for the way that I would have framed that study for a global audience is very different here.
Of course.
Here it's like, how do you do marketing in Asia?
Yep.
There, the framing was, how do you move fast and build brands, right? That is something anyone can relate to. And I'm really proud. I do a lot of presentations, but this is Cannes. It's free for all. You can show up if you want to show up and whatever. Our session was on a Thursday.
Yep.
that's usually the time when a lot of people are, drank a little bit too much rosé the night before, very tired.
Yeah.
We had a stage of 600
Amazing.
to fill. And
That's
I was
fantastic.
nervous. I don't normally get nervous.
How did it go?
I turned the stage and I literally, Nikki, I had to catch my breath and stop myself from crying, before going on stage because it was full.
Amazing.
And it was not just you want to win the Asians, of course.
Of course.
But it was not just the Asians who was there. And I remember afterwards I caught a drink with one of my speakers and this American woman just came. It's oh, were you guys the ones who presented PACE principle? I'm yeah, that's us. It's a great session. So that really warms my heart. So it's there are so many stories here that we can turn to teach the rest of the world about all the amazing things that are happening here.
I mean, exactly. Your point on same but different, but how you explained it, I think, a lot of marketers need to hear. But, we have a different view and it's sometimes hard to articulate. And you're right, we want to say we're different, but also not. But you explained it so well in saying that, it's actually the fact that we all have the same challenges. So the framework doesn't change of that type of thing. We all have core insights in human psychology that drives it. But it's those local nuances and understanding the differences of what happens that makes it different to implement and execute. So I think that was really great. I love that, you championing it here with Asians and helping us understand, because even within Asia, like I said, it's so complex. And when you have a regional role, a lot of us are still learning, different countries. And, unless we spend the time in the countries, some will know better than others. So that's fantastic that you're championing that. But more so, what I find really admirable is that you're pushing us out onto the stage on a global front. Because like you said, and this is where we can dive into in a moment, is that it's the speed we go at in Asia. It's really hard to explain to people, but the speed that we do because of the progress, we leapfrog a lot of technology. You brought that into it, and that's one of the considerations that we have. So because of the speed we go, there's a lot of variances and differences that happen that people could leverage out of Asia. And your report talks about the twin paces of growth. It's the sprint and the long distance. So why do Asian marketers in particular need to operate at both speeds at once?
For this, I need to explain why we went with the twin pace analogy. At the end of the day, it is just another way of saying, you have to balance or integrate brand and performance, right? Anyone who's working in marketing knows those terms, but the reason why we've kind of framed it around that, because I think the language that we use needs to reflect the modern day challenges that we are facing today.
Yep.
Speed is definitely, I know I said, it's born out of Asia, but again, that's not an Asian, we don't own speed.
We don't
you know
own
what I mean?
speed. No,
we don't own speed. We are, it's exacerbated here, but we don't, right? And we cannot ignore the fact that speed, every conversation I go into, everything's so fast, we have to deliver things so quickly, all of those things. So how do we update our language in a way that factors in the challenges that we're facing today? So speed is one. The other consideration, again, it's still just talking about balancing brand and performance, is how do I make it as simple and as practical to understand as possible, right? And that goes into, it talks about how you grew up in marketing, who taught you, not everyone, we might be living in a bubble where we can talk hours about marketing effectiveness, but if you really want to move the needle and get more people, they have to be able to find a way to lean in. And I find that, some of the common terms that we use in, the more marketing science academic world, sometimes it just goes over the head of a lot of people. So what is the simplest story that we can use to help it make it more accessible for everyday marketer?
Yep.
Or even, within an organization, if you're trying to kind of explain why balancing brand and performance is to someone who firstly doesn't even believe in brand in the first place.
That happens a lot.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
Everyone can relate to the idea of twin paces. So let me explain the reframe.
Okay.
Because I realized I hadn't done that yet. So think of marketing like a race for growth, and that race for growth has twin paces. So the short distance pace or the sprint pace is basically performance marketing to do short-term wins. And, in life and marketing, we have to acknowledge there's a long distance pace, right? And you can only sprint for a short period of time before what happens? You burn out. And it's end of the year. I'm feeling a lot of people are probably feeling that. which is why you need to have brand to kind of refuel for growth. And actually, it's not just about refueling growth for the long term, but it actually boost your performance even now. So that also addresses the misconception that investing in brand building is just a long-term outcome. No, brand and performance work together. So that is why, again, we're just trying to find a new way to explain that concept so more and more people can start practicing that as well.
So what you're saying is the twin paces is short-term is about performance marketing, but basically you can only sprint for so long. And once you cap out, then what do you got to help you, which is where brand comes in. I think the other point, like you said, it's not brand or performance, it's the multiplier effect. And brand still can help performance on the short term as well as the long term. So I think that's great. Which brings me to my next one, which is that short-termism is a global problem, not just in Asia, but you argue it is especially acute here. And what is driving that, and what are the risks for brand that only chase the short-term wins? Because we get that a lot. We see that a lot with not just the multinationals that are out here that are trying to grow in Asia, but also the great startups that we have coming out of the region.
So like you were saying, it is a global problem, right? And when we saw the WARC data, we found that when we compared it to other regions or markets, it was outsized here. And it really frustrates me, Nikki. It really does. Because the other thing that people use to characterize Asia is that we are an engine for growth. You and I both know brand and performance. Yes. You need to do both.
Got to do both.
You got to do both.
It's not one or the other.
It's not one or the other. But for some reason, people are not completing that side of the equation, right? And there are certain, this is a general statement, and I can give some hypotheses on why that is. So the reason why one of the main arguments for short-termism is, increased pressures, right? Yes. That everyone is facing. So there are maybe a couple of factors. One can be cultural. I've interviewed, CMOs to help me understand this better. And generally speaking, in Asia, business landscape is a lot more practical and pragmatic, right? And that means that, numbers, making it tangible and easy to understand. But but then that begs the question, how are you explaining the benefits of brand building or long-term brand building?
That's the difficulty for marketers, isn't it?
Exactly. Yep. Which is why I keep going back to this idea, what language are we using today to help with our challenges, right? Mm-hmm. So the first one is maybe cultural as well. How do you show that? I think the other one might be increased competition. Again, not an Asia problem, but I remember, again, at Cannes, there was a session about China outbound. And I really love what one of the speakers said. It's like, to survive in China, like you have to be the best of the best.
Yeah, you do.
Because, if I open a tea shop today, tomorrow someone can open a tea shop down the street or on WeChat or Lazada or Shopee.
Volume,
Exactly. It's not just volume, because the other difference today compared to before, it's a lot more accessible to manufacture. Firstly, Asia has always been more of the manufacturing powerhouse. If you think about advertising production, you can just create an Instagram or TikTok account. Not saying you can do it well, but you know what I mean? Like the competition, the digital shelf is so much more. And I think the other thing that we don't really acknowledge so much is like budget,
Yes.
Again, this is a general statement, but if where is the budget and money coming from? Historically speaking, especially for maybe bigger companies, like Asia is not the priority market, or it's it's not the priority market. So then the cuts go there, right? So then you have less budget to work with, and then again that adds to the pressure of that. Again, these are general statements, but it's kind of feel like, based on people that I speak to, is kind of like what I hear.
Yeah, what you're saying about budget is so true in this region, and it's not just cutting; it's also often where the growth market. I've had many times in my past, we've been designated as the growth market, but the budget has remained flat or not the ability to spend. And we know through the ROI, that advertising spend is the number one driver. If you can't get the word out there, people don't see you or anything like that. So, things like that do affect it. And I think there's some really good points there around the short-termism. But one myth you debunked in the report is that Asia moves too fast for brand building to really matter. But what does your data show about the real impact of brand investment in the region?
Yeah, that was a narrative North Star, for lack of a better word, so let me take a step back, why we focused on that. So before the study, of course, we asked, our respondents, like, what are some of the challenges so that we can ground this on actual things that people are coming up against. And that came up a lot, like, Asia's too fast for long-term brand building work. It will never work. No, that is not true.
Yes.
I'm going to keep saying on every platform that is not
Absolutely.
true.
I'll definitely say that with you.
Thank you.
The CMO Office is brought to you by Analytic Partners, the global leader in marketing mix modeling and commercial analytics, which turns data into expertise to help marketers make an impact in the C-suite. What kind of impact? Last year, every dollar spent on Analytic Partners, we returned $70 in incremental revenue. Find out more at analyticpartners.com.
You know why it's not true, Nikki? We are conflating two things. We are conflating an operational mindset. You have to move fast because, of pressures here and there. But that is not the same thing as a measurement or effectiveness mindset. We are conflating the two and assuming that any investment in long-term brand building or just brand building in general will be undermined by what's happening in the market. I argue that if you actually know your foundations and your fundamentals and who you stand for, you can move faster than ever before, right? So that's what we need to kind of go back to. We need to equip us. We need to move fast, but can we move smarter?
Yeah.
Can we move further? Because you asked me about a data point, right? So the one that I always use in my presentations is, again, that misconception that brand is only benefit for long term, right? But as you said earlier, and another study that WARC published, is that brand and performance work together. So actually, we have a chart there that shows that, what is the optimal mix to give you the highest impact on short-term results, going back to the short-termism point. You'd think that a mix that over-index on performance marketing would have the highest bar, but no.
You'd think so.
You'd think so.
That's what most would think.
Exactly. So it's the 50, exactly. It's the 50, it's the 50-50, and so those things kind of work together. And the more I speak to marketers, they're saying the same thing to me as well. Marketers here from different types of companies, from like digital startups, e-commerce, of course, FMCG and whatnot. So they work hand in hand. And the other thing as well, it's not, again, going back to my running analogy, which is ironic because I really don't run. But I feel like I need to start doing this after,
now that
this
you
report.
have the PACE report.
Exactly. So there's the not burning out, but it's also and running faster, but actually you can claim a bigger size of the pie.
You can.
You have a bigger thing that you can run towards or to win, right? Yeah. So that's the kind of the key thing I'd always like to point out.
Yeah, I'd like to touch on 2 points there. I think the first one is, part of this is that they're missing the attribution because they're, not missing attribution, but because marketers are relying on attribution, they are missing what's really happening. They're not taking into consideration that base. They're just looking at performance of the short term. They're not looking to see what happens at the tail end of those and how brand really does affect it in the long time. We can see from our research that when you just do performance marketing or just do brand, it's nowhere near the ROI that you get when you put them together. So when you have brand plus performance, we can see, an uptake of 90% ROI come in just by pairing them together. And I think you're right in the fact that, unfortunately, because they're looking at the data set, and you came back to the fundamentals and the language that they use. So because they're looking at attribution and that's how they're measuring, they're seeing the last click rather than they know when you talk to them, you're like, but it's not the last click. And they go, yeah, I know. And it's like, well, then why are you making your decisions based on that when brand is an important part of why are the top 500 brands in there? I mean, I used to work at Interbrand and I used to work on the top 500 brands or whatever and have to go through all of them. they're all in the Fortune, top 100 or whatever, because they invest in brand. Over a long period of time, they consistently invest in brand. So I think that's so important. I think you had something else to add in there.
No, you saw me gesturing over here. I have to stop myself because I keep wanting to add to what you're saying. But even you were referencing a lot of my reports. I actually want to reference some AP data that I've been using as well. Because earlier your question was, what's the cost, right?
Yeah.
And diminishing returns. I remember forgive me if I get the wrong, the actual, it's 46% of Southeast Asian marketers report diminishing returns on extra performance spend. I think that was the number that Analytics partners provided us for that. But exactly that, you're getting diminishing returns. That's what, again,
money on the table.
That's the space, again, going back to the storytelling of the race. Right?
Yeah.
You're starting to burn out. As you're burning out, your competitor who's actually investing in brand building is going to outpace you. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the sort of golden ticket, but for some reason, people just don't want to go all in on it.
And the other advice I would give. So one, again, marketers generally know it, but it's always about how you then kind of explain it to your CFO, CEO, or whatever, right?
Agree.
So now let's talk about numbers, right? So one is show them diminishing returns. So, analytic partners data points. But another one, I really love this from the CMO of Chaji. He said, actually, what you should do is, because he said that brand is a leading indicator of 6-month leading indicator of sales.
Yes,
so if you overlay that chart, actually, it will always generally correlate. And he's tested this across different markets. So actually, he gets worried when that starts to decline because you can more or less tell that your sales are going to decline. That is another tangible way to talk about, brand and performance and whatnot in a very practical financial term that anyone outside of marketing will understand.
And I think that's so important. And that's how I've always guided my teams. And, part of the benefit of working with analytic partners is it gives the confidence to CMOs to go into the room with a CFO and not be talking about its brand and, we did some engagement and it's out there. It's like you said, what are the leading indicators? Because brand takes time. It's the consistency of building it over time. And if you take the time as a marketer, and I would say to all the marketers out there, take the time to understand what your leading indicators are. Look at that brand and the brand search, what's happening over a 6-month, 12-month period, and, track it. And that way, that will help you to determine if sales are going to go up or down. And I think that's so important. I'm going to move forward because we could talk about brand and performance all day. It's one of my favorite topics, but we're not going to. We're going to move on to about culture, because in Asia, like we said, Singapore versus Thailand versus India, China, we're all vastly different. And Asia, with that diversity. So how can marketers tap into the cultural advantage to build the brands more effectively than our competitors from outside the region?
Well, Nikki, if there's a topic I can talk more than brand and performance, it's definitely culture, which has always been my passion point, even prior to my WARC days.
Yep.
But it's always important for us to find, firstly, what we mean by culture. And I feel like the industry needs to kind of recalibrate what we mean by that. In advertising, people always think culture equals pop culture.
Yep.
Or culture means what's trending, and hijacking that trend. Today's Labubus, next year, whatever it is,
yes.
Right? But actually, no, the definition of culture we should take is more of a sociological definition, which I like to define as, the invisible hand influencing attitudes, behaviors, and identity. So these are the invisible things. So things like pop culture and trends, those are signals of what's happening underneath, right? And when I was very adamant of making sure there was kind of a cultural analysis, because I don't think we interrogate it enough, because there are many avenues to cultural connection, right? Our study shows that the most basic thing, such as casting, for example, anyone again who's worked on a regional local campaign,
totally understands
let's just swap out those scenes instead of in London, do it in the streets of Bangkok or the people, right? That actually has the least amount of effects. The one that has the strongest amount of effects is having a shared point of view with your audience. And that, of course, intuitively makes sense because it talks about values. It talks about, shared point of view, an identity and whatnot. And actually then this moves out of culture as just, again, different expressions of culture. One idea is, Thai versus Filipino versus whatnot, like more demographic. But I feel like that framing is also useful for the world of, community market. Everyone's talking about tapping into communities and, the K-pop fans, the gamer fans and whatnot. Within this community, like there's shared values that are tying this whole community together. And these communities, they will get at you if you're like not authentically connecting with them, right?
Yep.
So if you take the time to actually understand their values and a point of view, then actually that is the highest, delivery of business effects. So, and I think in Asia, I feel like going back to the other larger theme that I feel like is coming out, which is kind of what is the Asia point of view to the world, right?
Yes.
What is our advantage?
Yes.
So speed is one. I think culture is another one.
Right. Okay.
So again, there are diverse cultures everywhere else in the world, Europe and whatnot. But I feel like that cultural mindset is like baked into anyone who's here because I think it's just a fact of life that because you deal with so much diversity, like it's just baked in you.
It's just normal. It's normality.
Exactly. So we can be a leading voice in what does cultural advantage actually, look like for brand building, not just in Asia, but worldwide.
Yeah. So what you're telling marketers is that they really have to think about the signals and about the values and how they connect. So it's great because, as you know, most marketers in the region do understand making sure if it's in Korea, it's in Seoul or wherever it is with the right character. But you're right in that it's the shared values. I know when we were at UPS, I was very lucky. We actually did put our campaign out and do some quant and qual research around it to really understand, did they connect with it? Did they understand it? And I got to listen with the simultaneous translates, and it was amazing to hear because you just wouldn't have thought about some of the things. Most of it for us in Asia, we were like, yeah, we could have told you that without having to ask them. But when it came to, like you said, the shared values or the beliefs or how that they interpret certain things, that's where we sort of uncovered the real nuances of what we needed to change. And, the overall concept, it worked, but there was still some work to be done to make it.
I want to add one more thing here. It's just why I feel like our definition of culture is important and be quite liberating because of the world we're living in today. Culture can be both a divisive force, but also a liberating force. It could also like us versus them, East versus West, whatever it is. But no, I think that we need, or, top down, bottom down, whatever. Actually, it shouldn't matter.
Yeah.
We're such in a hyper-connected world today. You know what I mean? And I'm going to test you a little bit. I don't know what your entertainment content consumption is. What was like the top show on Netflix recently?
Oh God, are you going to say? I don't know because mine's probably very different. Was it a Korean one?
Yeah,
it was.
Korean inspired. It
would have been Korean. So
but
you test me on the wrong thing. I can't remember movie names or
no worries.
That's like the one thing that goes out of my brain.
It's basically K-pop Demon Hunters.
Oh, I saw that too. My son made me watch that.
Yeah. Now that I say it, I can hear like soda pop, in my head.
That.
But do you know what I mean? Like that is like obviously it is inspired by Korean codes and whatnot, but it's not being marketed as this is a Korean like show or whatever. It just so happened to be grounded in the setting of Korea. But people in America love K-pop.
They do.
You know what I mean? Like if you think about how these trends and these influencers, they're more cross-pollinating than ever before. So stop putting ourselves in these boxes and kind of lean into the hyper connectivity of that. And I think that's such an interesting kind of creative play box for people.
Showing that unique and diversity that we have and actually showcasing it out loud. No, I totally agree. I think, some Western marketers still see Asia as very tactical and performance-led. But again, your report highlighted the powerful creative work coming from this region. So I think you just touched on that there. Is there anything else that you wanted to add? Because I know we talked about the trends and the cultural thing.
I think... creativity, there are so many different blends of creativity, right? But then you also, again, need to understand the objective of that as well. Of course, if you're trying to, speak to like Thai audiences, Filipino audiences and whatnot, you need to kind of understand how the medium and message kind of helps them be more receptive to that creativity. So I think that's kind of the key point I would add on to what I was saying about creativity, which is it is a route. Culture is culture is the platform for creativity to kind of connect with audiences in a way,
Culture
because
is the connection.
It is the connection or the platform because, for example, that's why I'm going back to the very simple example of, global campaigns here, right? Some codes or humor or wherever else does not work. Like it might work somewhere else, but when you go into market, like, will that offend? Will they get it? Is it too literal and whatnot, right? So it's not just about, again, if we add the effectiveness angle here, yes, there is a lot of, great, Thai, Filipino, I'm going to keep saying I'm from the Philippines. you know what I mean? But like for what? Right. Yeah. And we need to kind of celebrate that.
We do. And I think just for the marketers, because, we have a wide audience out there. So for the newer marketers, when we talk about codes, we're talking about those memory structures that, again, because you and I are a little bit geeky in our effectiveness and data and stuff like that. So when we talk about codes, we're talking about those memory structures of if you see something consistently, like the McDonald's jingle and stuff like that, it's McDonald's. So those codes that are dropping through them. And that's what goes to brand building, which is what you and I are very passionate about. But I'm going to switch it up a little bit. And this time I'm going to ask you, you show that effective campaigns in Asia use around 6.5 channels on average. And why does multi-channel momentum matter so much here? Because I was talking with our team before and I was just double checking. I was like, we see that, right? Because we also say, it's channel synergy that really helps with the ROI. And I wanted specifics for Asia. So I checked with the team. I said, are we sitting around that? He goes, yes. And he actually told me for channel synergy and for multi-touch in Japan, I mean, we can see 10 to 15 channels that are actually needed to get that ROI.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'll bring back what we said earlier, same, but different. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like we know a principle of effective marketing is basically, cross-channel effects, right? But honestly, Nikki, yes, there's a number of channels, but I think the more interesting question is the combination of channels. And are you pairing it in the right way depending on your particular objective, right? And again, I just want to caveat, 6.5. Yeah, 6.5 is, again, it's not a silver bullet. It's very context specific, very category specific, but the principle behind it, which is the synergistic effects, right? So one of the data points in the report was, of course, the use of influencers, right? Of course, influencers, creators, hot topic, generally speaking, but even more so now, right? And we saw that actually just influencers alone are not enough.
Yes.
Because yes, they're an important channel, but influencers, it's their own little echo chambers on digital platforms. Yep. Imagine if you pair that with other kinds of mediums and platforms, then you're finding
TV, radio.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why I said it's not just about the number of channels, but what combinations of channels and what are you using for, I think is the more, strategic question to ask.
Exactly. I think it's so critical for marketers to realize that it's the holistic view of the channels. And like you said, it's what you pair them with. I mean, we see often, if you put TV out of home up front when you're launching a product and then you ramp up your digital, the ROI is significantly higher. But when you take a step back, it makes perfect sense because as a consumer, we don't see something on one day and go, yes, I buy it straight away. You need time, like we said, those codes, those memory structures to see it consistently. And that sort of builds and to understand the message. And definitely those brand messages is what we want to see at the forefront. And then the more tactical ones we see are when the digital sort of comes through and pulls us through. So I think it's so important to have that. You also point out that many campaigns in Asia measure only during the campaign period. But what does that undercooking of measurement hurt effectiveness so much? Why does it hurt it?
Oh, measurement. Measurement is another topic we can go on and on and on about. And we were actually very deliberate on what angle we wanted to put measurement on. There's things as sophisticated as like MMMs and whatnot. But again, we wanted to go back to the fundamentals, right? The most fundamentals and the simplest thing that you can do in your measurement mindset, which is, are you still using short-term ROI as like your North Star, right? Mm-hmm. Are you only looking at short-term effects? Actually, because whether or not of how you measure, like these advertising effects are just going to happen in the wild. You know what I mean? Brand and performance are going to be working together. But if you're only measuring for like 3 months, like you're leaving you're leaving money on the table to communicate.
Is that money on the table again?
Exactly. You're leaving it on the table. It's going to happen anyway. But if you're not capturing it, like then when you have to report back to your internal stakeholders, just like, so where's the return? And then it's like, you're kind of put on a back foot for that. So that was just a very simple kind of example of, that kind of effectiveness measurement mindset I was talking about. And again, kind of connecting the dots with some of the earlier stuff we were talking about, which is basically it's like training and language and the way that we talk about these things. Like that's the underpinning, I think maybe I would argue, like the crux of the problem and the challenge, so that more people, because it starts from there.
It does. Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that. I think what you're saying is that, tools like MMM that measure everything are definitely where we want to go. But even as a minimum, don't stop at 3 months. So much happens with the tail end, and you need to consider what's happening after, and that will give you the data points to be able to have, like you said, change the language of what you need for your CFO. Before we get into the final question, which is a fun one, if you had one piece of advice to senior marketers that are listening who want to avoid the performance doom and loop and unlock their brand's long-term value along with how they win with the pace, what would it be?
I thought long and hard about this, Nikki. I think maybe it's end of the year and I'm feeling particularly reflective mode, I would say, like, what's your end game?
Okay.
What are you working towards, right? Because I kind of alluded to it in my previous answer. I think it's, this is fundamentally a leadership kind of question.
Yes.
Are you doing more of the same?
Yes.
Are you relying on things that you thought worked in the past, and are you resetting the way that you're doing things so that it fits the challenges today and the goals that you need to hit? And I also think it's a tough time out there. It's brutal. And I actually feel like we have a kind of collective responsibility to make sure that, the companies that we work for are profitable, to keep people employed, to, deliver value for our customers and whatnot. And we're not going to get there without kind of going back to the fundamentals and kind of, balancing both, brand and performance, or taking a twin pace approach, because that's why I go back to, like, what's your end game, you know? Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of the provocation I would give, not an advice, but kind of a provocation to marketers.
Yeah, I agree. I think for senior marketers, the one thing that they need to think about at the end of the year is, what is their end game? How did they do well in 2025? How are they going to go forward to 2026? One thing I've always had at the top of my mind is, I work for a company, it's not my company, or if it was, what is the goal? There's a business goal, a business objective. How do we get that profit in? It's not about marketing. The end goal is profitability. And I think if we all come back, like you said, around that type of language, we'll get there faster than what we thought. All right. Thank you, Rica. I've got one more question before we finish up. It's a fun one. We don't put it on because we don't like people to know in advance. I just want to know, what is your most marketing word that gives you the ick?
Oof. What a good question. What ick? More than one? I can only pick one?
If you've got more than one, you can. I only need one.
The first one is kind of AI plus human. Like, we know that already, okay? Like, can we please move on to the next of, AI plus human for what, right?
Yep.
What outcome are you trying to drive?
Yes.
That should be it. And that's why I said I wanted another one, because the other thing that is always associated with AI is efficiency. Yes, efficiency done, but how do we bring effectiveness into that equation? You might be doing...
I like that. Effectiveness, not efficient.
Of course.
Effectiveness.
Exactly. You might be doing things
Stronger
faster,
word.
But then what else are you doing for your time? Exactly. So, that's my cheat. Okay, it's related to one because it's about AI. That's my 2 X.
I love that. Well, thank you so much, Rica, for taking the time with us today to speak. Some really great nuggets in there, and I really appreciate it. To our listeners, if you would like more help in bringing commercial clarity to your own marketing, our modeling team across APAC is always here for a chat. Until next time, thanks for listening to the CMO Office podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe to all of our usual places, but most especially at the-cmo-office.com. Bye for now.